really important thing that changed my world, frankly, was understanding that we are not a mistake. We needed to be here for human survival. We were doing absolutely fantastic up until roughly the Industrial Revolution, and especially when we were forced into cubicles. That's just not a good place for us, and that's okay.
Welcome to OTR, Over the Rainbow, Achieving Mental Health for Real. This podcast offers hope to many people who needlessly suffer from mental health issues. Your host, Bob Adelman, interviews experts like doctors, counselors, and life artists who give helpful tips on living a happier life. But most importantly, Bob interviews ordinary people who have suffered with a mental health issue. Each one has recovered to lead a much happier life. You can do it too. Bob's notes on today's show followed.
Today, I talk with Elle O'Flaherty, who is an executive coach and performance optimization speaker with a subspecialty in ADHD coaching. Elle came to coaching after 17 years as a federal attorney and trade negotiator. Her work has been published in national and international media outlets, and her groundbreaking course teaching career coaches how to work with ADHD clients has been lauded by participants and coaching educators. Elle holds a JD from the College of William and Mary and a journalism degree from James Madison University.
Now, here's Bob with today's show.
Good morning, Elle. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you. Could you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I am the founder and owner of a coaching firm. We mostly work with professionals and executives on all sorts of things, including leadership, anything with executive coaching. But our real specialty and subspecialty is ADHD coaching. So we work with lots and lots of people from the community. I am also, of course, ADHD, and all of our ADHD coaches are also from the community.
Great. The audience is heavy ADHD because I have very bad ADHD, which I blame for everything else. So when you were growing up, what was your environment like as a child?
Well, good question. I guess growing up in Virginia in the 1980s, of course, girls did not get ADHD, so I was spared from that until we realized that girls could get ADHD, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult as a result. So it was a real challenge. It definitely was, going through school and assuming that I was all the usual things that we tell ourselves, lazy, irresponsible, not fulfilling my potential. And so it was a challenge because my ADHD, of course, made it really difficult to excel in school in a conventional way. I was lucky that I didn't particularly need to study, and I kind of did everything last minute and it worked out okay. Even all the way through law school. I was a lawyer for almost 20 years, but once I understood ADHD, everything became just so much easier.
When I was a child, they didn't even hear of anything like ADHD. It was like, I'm 65, so it was like World War II parents, they don't. Mental health? Oh, what's that? And so I suffered greatly. I developed OCD and depression, anxiety. And I also suffered a low self-esteem because my brothers were there to pound me on every mistake that I made. And they pretty much didn't let me talk at the table because they'd cut me off. And so I still have a fear of talking a little bit better on a microphone. But I do have problems with remembering words sometimes and saying them wrong and mispronouncing things. So it was a mess until about when I was 6 years old, doing the show and then going on Facebook groups. And I learned that everybody had the same problem. I really thought I was totally alone. And I think a lot of my audience and a lot of people out there think they're alone, and that's the message I want to send out, is that they're not alone, and there's no embarrassment about it being ADHD. You learn a different way. You need to have certain things that they're not offering in school sometimes. So it becomes a real pest. So I guess just from what I read in your background is that you have found a way where it's a little bit more fun to be ADHD. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, let me just agree with everything you just said. I definitely went through that myself when I was training as an ADHD coach. The light bulbs just constantly were going off, understanding the things that I did and how they were completely normal for ADHD people. And I really think as a coach, that's one of the biggest things that gifts I can give to my clients in the early days of our sessions is just letting them know that things are totally normal for our community and there's nothing wrong with our brains. They just work differently, which is part of how I went down the road of finding a more joyful life for myself and really appreciating and accepting my ADHD. I as I said, I used to be an attorney. I was a litigator, a trade negotiator, which was incredibly detail oriented, sort of solitary work and just not really well suited to my brain. So I made a huge, huge career change and I've changed pretty much everything so that now my business is very ADHD friendly. I've set up my physical environment to be ADHD friendly. I've just made all these changes and I'm really, really glad you used the word fun because it's the one thing that I always ask clients. I say, "Are you having fun?" And most people can't answer the question. They have no idea what they do for fun, if they're having fun. They never think about it. And I always tell them we have an interest-based brain. And one of the things that our brain craves is fun and, of course, interest. And so adding those things into our lives is the most positive way to lean into ADHD strengths and to help us really excel and find happiness, essentially. And so I'm so happy that you used the word fun. It's perfect.
Well, I think it's very important that people know that the name ADHD is awful. First of all, you don't have to be hyperactive. And in my opinion, it's definitely not a disorder. But I like to think that ADHD is not really a problem. It's the society that makes it a problem and makes it a disorder when it's really not.
I could not agree more with you about everything down to how terrible the name ADHD is. I liken it to I'm left-handed and I live in a right-handed world and it's incredibly frustrating. And I tell
Mhm.
a story about how I was trying to use a right-handed can opener, which is mechanically impossible to do it as a left-handed person. And so it was so unbelievably frustrating and upsetting until I bought myself a left-handed can opener. And all of a sudden, everything was easy. It was no problem. I never even thought about it. So changing the way that we do things, and ideally, what I'm really, really trying to work towards is changing how society and workplaces expect us to do things is the most powerful thing that we can do. It's basically just find your left-handed can opener and suddenly everything gets so much easier.
Right. And I think there's a definite stigma today. When I mentioned it at one of my jobs, they immediately pretty much put the paperwork in to get me out because, they saw it like everybody else sees it as a disorder, a mental illness, but it isn't anything like that. The problem is that I don't know if you could say we never grow up, but we certainly don't become like neurotypical people. I have a couple of videos out there on my Facebook about how it sounds to us to get on a bus or an airplane, which because it's just noise, you pick up
Mhm.
everyone else's conversation, and it's terrible. I dread mass transit. I dread going through the airport. In school, I think ADHD people they think and learn in concepts. They need the big picture first, and then it snaps in their head. I've worked in IT for 50 years, and all I had to do was stare at something long enough, a map, a diagram, whatever it was, and I got everything.
Mhm.
So how does a person, I guess, relate to other people without making them mad. Like, I mean, when you cut them off, they get upset. When you don't remember what you're supposed to remember, they get upset. They're always tense about, oh, what am I going to do wrong? What detail am I going to get wrong? What instruction I can't do? Uh, how am I going to react when they say I'm stupid or retarded? Those are the things that I think destroy people's self-esteem. Uh,
Yeah. Well, you touched on a bunch of really good points. Unfortunately, and of course, if anyone is listening to this and needs to get help, please contact a suicide prevention line. But I am actually working with a professor from Kent State on adjusting some suicide prevention tools so that they work better for ADHD folks. We are 600 to 1,000% more likely to attempt or have suicidal ideation. So that is a really important thing. Um, as you said, I totally agree. It is not a disorder. And in fact, I speak to a lot of groups about ADHD. And with my presentation, I always start out by highlighting the strengths. I go through a lot of the strengths, which most people either don't realize exist or they haven't really connected with ADHD. And as you're saying, I mean, we are some of the most creative and innovative people that you're ever going to meet. We're 300% more likely to be entrepreneurs. And so we have this incredibly important role in society. It's really interesting. There's this NIH study where they did modeling showing early human groups. And they showed that having a small number of people with ADHD traits was actually critical for human survival.
right.
And so we bring all of these things to the table. And I really think that most neurotypical people, which more than 90% of neurotypical people have negative associations with ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
I think that they aren't very well educated and they don't understand. They might understand a few stereotypical things, almost entirely, if not entirely negative. So one of the big things that I like to do is to point out these huge strengths and how we should be leaning into those. And of course, adding any tools or systems we need to make some of our areas of challenges easier. So, for instance, when you're talking about our memory, yes, absolutely. Short term memory is a challenge. And when I work with, big organizations, things like that, and I give ADHD trainings, especially for managers and other folks who are not ADHD, I'll often explain to them the importance of uh, giving a task so that it is a short, succinct, to the point tasker that people can understand, ideally in writing, which is even better, but certainly allowing an ADHD person to take notes and mirror back what they're hearing to double check their understanding. And so there are all sorts of things that we can do. But the really important thing that changed my world, frankly, was understanding that we are not a mistake. We needed to be here for human survival. We were doing absolutely fantastic up until roughly the Industrial Revolution, and especially when we were forced into cubicles. That's just not a good place for us,
Oh,
and that's
no.
okay. Um, but understanding that our brain is amazing and can do all these things that neurotypical brains essentially can't or can't in the same way is really helpful. One of my favorite things is when I start talking to clients about accommodations, and they always think it's going to be reasonable accommodations for them. But I always start out with the accommodations we need to make for neurotypical people. So, for instance, we often need to speak more slowly, or we need to more connect dots of our ideas, especially with more detail, because their brains just aren't quite as fast and
Mhm.
aren't making all the connections that we are. And I find that people just find that so soothing. It's so great to hear about like not deficits, but differences in neurotypical brains.
Right. And when I was at work, I had to pretty much mask. I looked at people and I did what they did because, and I hid my problem. I had severe dyslexia as well, but I was writing memos. I was writing documents, big, important documents, and I knew how to write it. It just took maybe 20 times I had to proofread it on average. So that's the kind of stuff that would burn anybody out. And so, what do you think about what we can do about that kind of burnout? Because I know neurotypicals will say, you're doing great, you're doing great. And then you just stop and you rest. How come? So what can we tell somebody that we're working for about something like that, where we work real hard, we get a lot done in one day, then we need to take it easy
Great
because they
point.
expect you to go at that speed all the time, and it wasn't possible for. I had to hide it. I had to hide my breaks. I made it look like I was working or whatever. It was very scary and difficult.
Yep, absolutely. And that is such an important thing, right? One of our strengths is hyper focus. So we can get some, if we have a great day and we're very hyper focused, we can get what another person might take a week, maybe more to get done. We can do it in a day. What that means, though, is essentially you're spending your energy in your future energy. So, of course, you need recovery time. It's such a good thing for ADHD people to understand that, because many of us will be upset with ourselves if we can't constantly be at that rate of productivity. But it's not reasonable, because it is this very energy intensive thing. And so needing to have a rest afterwards, for an afternoon, a day, whatever it takes, is completely normal and natural to us. I think one thing that can be very helpful is setting aside tasks like going through papers and throwing them away, or
Hmm.
deleting junk emails or whatever, for those days when you are recovering, so that you're doing something, but it doesn't take a lot of brain power. Um, I am very much hoping, and I always say this to people when I'm talking to groups, that people will come to understand that ADHD folks work in peaks and valleys. That's how we work best,
Hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with it. So I also think, frankly, our community can do a better job of spreading information about ADHD, especially in a very positive and strengths based way, similar to how the autism community has done. People really understand autism a lot more than they used to. And I think that they are far ahead of us in educating the general
Hmm.
population.
Yes. Especially, I had a lot of difficulty because I had to hide my problems and things like that. But in today's environment, do you feel that it's safe to go to your employer and say, "Here, I do things in different ways"? Do you think that's a safe thing now? Because I didn't feel safe doing that.
Well, so that's a really, really important and good question. That is a very strategic choice that should not be taken lightly. I can tell you what the studies show, and then I can tell you what I usually recommend to my clients. So, studies show that about 68% of ADHD people never disclose their ADHD in the workplace. Of those who do disclose, about half of them find that they are either fired, they lose out on promotions, or they do not receive the accommodation that they've requested. So, knowing that it is a very sticky situation, I usually ask clients things like, is anyone in upper level leadership openly ADHD? Has anyone else disclosed, and how did it go for them? Um, I tend to, unfortunately, and I really hate that I have to say this, but I tend to lean towards advising people to be cautious. One way, so there are three main ways to disclose: full disclosure, where everyone would know that you're ADHD; partial disclosure, where you would disclose just to those people that need to know, that are having an impact, like your supervisor; and then non disclosure and self accommodation. And that is where, instead of going to your supervisor and saying, I have ADHD, so I need X, you would go and say something like, um, I do better when I'm able to record a transcript of meetings that we're having via Zoom. It's much easier for me to review afterwards and just to make sure that I have a full understanding. Um, would it be all right if I recorded the transcript, and I'm happy to share it with anyone else for whom it might be helpful? And that is, instead of talking about a deficit that you have, it's really showing it as a strength and explaining how it benefits you and, importantly, the organization. So I often help clients to reframe any area that they might need accommodation, so that it comes across as a strength and sort of an extra thing that you're doing to be, that much more diligent. Um, I wish I could tell you that it's perfectly safe to disclose now, but the studies are showing that that is not where we are.
Yeah. That's very, very unfortunate. I suffered, a lot of anxiety because of that. I always was afraid somebody would find out. And the other thing I suffered, even at work, was bullying. Um, because I made mistakes that were quote unquote stupid, people wouldn't take me seriously in some cases, and they would pound me, with practical jokes and treat me like I'm a clown or, be condescending. And there was always at least one person that wanted to just come in and bully me. And it was very
Mhm.
difficult. Yeah, I don't know what this, how you can resolve that because, we're very sensitive people. And, I used to hate that. I used to hate, they would play practical jokes on me, things like that. Not everybody, just, certain people at certain times. Probably when my boundaries weren't high enough, I let down my boundaries and they knew, okay, there's something a little bit off with this guy, so we're going to make fun of him. So do you have any advice in that area? Should you just keep it secret and never be yourself,
Yep. So there are two sides to what you're saying that are really important. Um, First of all, there is the bullying in the workplace, which I've been in the workplace for 25 years and it has really improved a lot since the early days. And I think we're much more cognizant of that. So really putting a name on it and feeling free to, talk to the folks who are doing it, to talk to your or their supervisor or HR is absolutely reasonable and normal these days. It is not normal to be bullied in the workplace.
Well, just to let you know, when I did actually complain to my manager, I got a lot of hate from that person afterwards. So that's the one reason I didn't do it more often. Um, I don't
Yep.
know how to get around that because he found out that I told him that I didn't want to be bullied, and he was pretty vicious after that. I know this was a very difficult problem for me to the point of where almost wanted to fight me. I mean, we're both 40 years old, and he wanted to punch me. It was ridiculous.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. That is not okay and not normal. So I first just want to validate that. Um, Two things that I would want to touch on. The first is when you're talking about your boundaries, it is very typical for ADHD folks to have trouble establishing and maintaining boundaries. There
Hmm.
are a few reasons for this. One certainly is that we tend to be people pleasers and we want to make people happy and those sorts of things. The other reason is because most of us were called weird or whatever else in school. And so we are used to having our boundaries trampled, which is unfortunate. So doing
Hmm.
some work around boundaries, I do this all the time with clients, can be very helpful, both understanding where your boundaries are and how to maintain them. The second one is because we are often pinpointed as different and weird or whatever we were called as kids, we tend to have less opportunities to practice our social skills. And we tend to have more trouble picking up on social cues and how to fine tune our social skills. So there are definite ways to work on social skills, certainly as kids, which is the best time to do it, but as ADHD adults as well, so that we can understand other people's social signals and we can sort of adjust a bit to that. It can be really, really helpful and it can help smooth lots of social situations. Now, this is not at all to say that what your coworkers and boss were doing is okay. It is absolutely not. Um, and you shouldn't have to change yourself to put up with bullying at all. However, strengthening these social skills and being able to relate better to neurotypical people can be very helpful. And it's something that I often recommend for folks.
Yeah, my problem was, you know, people quickly not like me because of what they perceived as rudeness or, being a bully myself or, so it was very hard for me to plug in the proper social procedure. If I went on interviews, forget about it. I was super nervous because I was always afraid that something would happen. I would slip up, and it would cost me a lot of respect from another person.
And that's really, really common. What you're describing, completely common, because we tend to be a bit more straight shooters. So we might not do some of the social niceties that people expect from us, unless we're heavily masking, which of course spends our energy for the day down. The way we talk sometimes can be a little bit more concise and direct, where people will misinterpret that. Of course, we also tend to have trouble modulating our volume. We have trouble standing an appropriate distance from people. So those sorts of things are skills, and they're social skills. No one is born with them. They're absolutely teachable. And that's why I recommend, you know, looking into ways to learn those skills. But the other thing is, there's nothing wrong with us that this is how we are. And every year I go to the ADHD conference. The big conference this year is in Baltimore in November. It is so nice to be around a group of ADHD people who all get it. Many of us are acting in similar ways. No one is being judgmental. It's really nice to find ADHD spaces, could be support groups, could be different things, and to get a moment to take your mask off fully and just be you and appreciate that there is nothing wrong with it. Just because neurodivergent people act in a slightly different way and expect us to act the same way doesn't mean there's anything wrong with how we go about things. So if no one's ever been to an ADHD conference or support group or meeting, I highly recommend it. The first time I went and a woman was walking around with about 5 cell phones and yelling out, "Has anyone lost a cell phone?" I knew I was in the right place. It was
This broadcast is meant to bring information to people on how they can help themselves, how they can help their self-esteem. How should you play it? Like, if you think somebody is bullying you, or if you think you just pull away from those people?
Yeah. So important. This is something that I work with clients on all the time. And I will often ask them, who are their supporters? If it's a partner, a spouse, if it's, their children, whomever it might be. And I ask, how much do they know about ADHD? And it's almost always that they don't know much. And so one of the things that I love doing, especially with partners, is having them come for a session or two so that we can talk about and teach them what ADHD is and better ways to interact with an ADHD person. So, for instance, very common thing that I have is that neurotypical partners won't understand how to handle hyperfocus. And so, setting some ground rules around when hyperfocus should be protected and let the ADHD person kind of roll with it. And then also ideas for how to help an ADHD person transition. And so I had one client who their partner would yell out to them and say, "Hey, it's dinner time," whatever. And it was very, very difficult for them to stop what they were doing. And so we worked through it, and it turned out what he needed, and this is probably different for many people, but what he needed was for his partner to come, touch him on the shoulder and say, "Do I have your attention?" And then he would say, "Yes, you have my attention," so that they can make sure they were in sync. And then his partner would say whatever it was they needed to say, like it's dinner time or, whatever. And then also that they would wait and collect things like little questions here and there that needed to be asked instead of asking them as they come up in their head, waiting for a time period that's good for the ADHD person, and good for both of them. So it is really, really about making sure that those around you understand ADHD, including all of the positives, and that they understand good ways to work together. And it definitely is a two-way street. So, I had an ADHD client who was having so much trouble with doing any cleaning around the house. And is the answer for their neurotypical partner to do it all? No, absolutely not. But we found ways to make changes in their household, in how they ran it, what it looked like, things like that, so that it was much easier for this person to contribute effectively. So I think the most important thing is education, making sure that you openly talk about ADHD, that your partner understands and values it, as well as saying the huge positives. Like you're saying, we're so fun. Usually it's such a great thing. you asked me a moment ago how I work with people, and that's a great question. I do a couple of different things. These days, I do a lot of speaking where I speak to organizations, and I sometimes will talk to the self-selected ADHD folks within their organization about how they can help motivate themselves and be productive and all those good things. Um, then I also talk to the organization at large so that neurotypical people can understand how we function and how to best interact with us. In addition to that, I do one-on-one coaching, which I love, and it's so transformative and so much fun. And as I said, I sometimes will work with people and their partners or families, so they hopefully aren't getting to that point that people understand what's going on and they can work together better before it gets to such a negative place. Um, and then I also offer two online courses, both of which are going to launch in the next couple of weeks here. One is a course for ADHD people. It's nice that it's bite-sized chunks, but it's very comprehensive and it goes over sort of soup to nuts, all the things that tend to impact ADHD people. The other course is actually for coaches and counselors or therapists, and it teaches them how to work with ADHD people because I find that too few of the people who are there to help us necessarily understand us. And so I'm really trying to close that gap. Um, if any of your listeners are interested in coaching or having me speak or anything like that, my website is interlacesolutions.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, and I have a LinkedIn newsletter that is called ADHD Professionals and Execs. And it is a monthly newsletter that gives lots of information. I have also a monthly newsletter you can sign up for on my website that's even more comprehensive. So I am really here to help people and to give as much information as I can. And I would love to offer that to you, Bob. If there's anything I can do, I can help give information or, be helpful, please just let me know. I'd love to help.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely check it out. I encourage my audience who are heavy ADHD people to check that out, and hopefully they do get a lot out of this show. Is there any final advice that you would want to give?
As I hope that the main message that people have gotten from this show, and I'm sure from your other shows, is your ADHD brain is just right. When I'm coaching people with ADHD, I'm never trying to change them or change their brains. It's not effective. It's pretty unpleasant. Instead, I'm trying to lean into their brains and go with what their brain wants to do. So if you're noticing that something is a real struggle or very difficult for you, it probably means that it is not the way your brain wants to do something. And that's when I encourage people to get curious and think about how they can make changes so that things are easier for them. And the one last thing, the little tidbit that I'll give you is there are 5 main ways to motivate an ADHD brain to do anything. I use the mnemonic funky. It is not spelled correctly, so please forgive me, but it's FUNCI. And the first one is fun. If you can inject fun, our brains get interested and we're in. The U is for urgency. This is the one that most of us rely on, especially before we learn new tools. So this is where if the paper is due in the morning, we started at midnight the night before, it's kind of stressful. You can also create urgency in different ways besides just deadlines. So I try to move people off that. The N is for novelty. So doing things in a new way with new people, our brain loves that. The C is for a challenge. So it could be you set a timer, make a bet with a friend, anything like that. We love that. That gets us really engaged. And then the I is interest. If we're naturally interested in something, then we're there. We want to do it and we'll get into hyper focus. So thinking about how to rearrange the things you need to do, your life, and how to inject one of these 5 motivators can be a game changer for a lot of people and help people get things done that have been a problem in the past.
Do you ever advise that anyone that they might want to consider medication, or you're pretty much hands off with that?
Good question. So again, I love the data, as you can probably tell. ADHD medication is effective for about 80% of us. It is considered the gold standard. However, I don't advocate one way or the other. I think it's a really personal decision. Um, the second best approach for ADHD people is ADHD coaching. So even with medication, I highly recommend coaching. It can be completely transformative. Um, I take medication and it has really helped me, but that doesn't mean that everyone needs to. And I'm also, of course, not a healthcare professional. So I always refer people to some of the folks in my network who are. But either way, whether you take medication or not, there are significant ways to improve how you're experiencing your life.
That's great. I really want to thank you a lot for coming on the show and giving us such great information. I'm sure it'll be well received. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure. And thank you for having me on.
All right. Thank you.